Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Children of Light podcast. And today we're going to be continuing on in our Christmas series. This is our second episode. And Matt is here with me. And we're going to be going into covering the prophecy in Micah 5:2 and the fulfillment of that prophecy, as well as how it fits in to, well, the Christmas story. So I'm going to read Micah 5:2, and then we're going to jump into our points. Bethlehem Ephrathah, you are small among the clans of Judah. One will come from you to be ruler over Israel for me. His origin is from antiquity, from ancient times.
Perfect. And so, yeah, this is going to be the prophecy that we're going to be talking about for the remainder of this episode. And so, the first things that I notice here is the first section here Bethlehem Ephrathah, you are small among the clans of Judah. And so, why is it Bethlehem and why is it being, a small city so important to this prophecy?
So, the first thing that I think of when we talk about Bethlehem, especially in the time of like Christmas and even just in general, thinking of that place is it being the birthplace of King David. And we see that being the birthplace in 1 Samuel 16.
Yeah.
Um, and the second thing is the Messiah, Jesus Christ. That was where he was born. It was Bethlehem. It this prophesied that the Messiah, it showed God's fulfillment of these promises through the Davidic line. So because the Davidic line is talked about in 2 Samuel, and we see that in the genealogy of Christ in Matthew 1.
Hmm.
Um, and now you asked about it being so small, like why was Bethlehem chosen? It was a
Yeah.
small place in Judah. It wasn't like one of the big ones. Um, I think what that shows us is its humility,
Mm,
really. Um, Unlike massive places like Jerusalem or Capernaum or somewhere like that,
yeah.
you see this was a humble, lowly place where Jesus humbled himself by coming in a manger.
Yeah.
Um, it really, like, I think what it does is it kind of contrasts, if it's the right word, to what our world thinks today of
Yeah.
where you should come from. Like, if you are gonna be a king or the president or something, like, "Oh, you need to come from a wealthy family, you gotta come from someone," like, no. Jesus came from, like, 16, 17-year-olds, from a virgin,
Yeah.
from 2, they were not married, they were betrothed, which is a different thing
Hmm.
back in that time, and I mean, really, that's not something that you see today. That reminds me of Zechariah 9:9 and the fulfillment of that when Jesus rode in humbly on a donkey
Yeah.
to before his crucifixion, of course. So I think for me, that's kind of how I would answer that question to somebody. That's a very deep point.
Absolutely.
So
Thank you. Yeah.
um and now like going into one will come from you to be ruler over Israel for me. Who is the one there, Matthew?
It's a good question because it doesn't, specifically put him by name, of course. But I think the one talked about here is clearly going to be Jesus,
Mm,
or the coming Messiah, which we do know as Jesus, because it says one is coming for God, and so we see clearly that God is sending them. So he clearly has the power and the authority
mm,
from God.
yeah,
Now, we did see that in the prophets and in some judges, God sent them with power and authority. But at this point in Israel's time, the time of the kings are over, time of the judges are over,
mhm,
and the next ruler that we see coming to Israel at this point isn't until the Messiah comes. Jesus
right,
comes, so he's really the next ruler. And so it's kind of almost logical to think that the one talked about here, if he's given power and authority from God to carry out God's will, and the next ruler that we see in line here is Jesus, um, then it's clearly talking about Jesus at this point, the
yeah,
pre incarnate Lord.
right,
So I think that's the best way to explain that. Um, And I think maybe you can explain this more into the next part where it says his origin is from antiquity, from ancient times. Does that kind of further what I was saying about him? Does that give more proof that it's Jesus?
Absolutely. I think one of the big things I think with that one is that line that Micah gives there that God commanded him to do. This is inspired wording from God. And I think the thing that that really shows is Christ's pre-existence. He is uh, from eternity past. He does not have a beginning. God does not have a beginning.
Yeah.
And what I think that does is it shows us back in the Old Testament, what was God's name? It was I am. I am who I am. He says that to
Hmm.
Abraham, and that was his name. In Hebrew, that was God's name. And what how we kind of pronounce that today would be Yahweh.
Hmm.
That would be God's name. Um, and another thing that reminded me of is a song that we sing in church, Ancient of Days. And I think what that really that phrase is basically saying he's eternal. He is from eternity past. He
Yeah.
is the Ancient of Days. So that for me is kind of how I would answer that. And now leading into this whole culmination of this verse, how does this verse well, where is this verse really fulfilled?
Yeah, perfect. It's great, Leaning, because now that we've finished the prophecy, of course, our whole theme is about a promise fulfilled, and so we've got to see where this is fulfilled, and we're actually going to find that here in Luke, chapter 2, verse 4 through 7. So let me read that for you guys really quick. It says Joseph also went up from the town of Nazareth in Galilee to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family line of David, to be registered along with Mary, who was engaged to him and was pregnant. While they were there, the time came for her to give birth. Then she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him tightly in cloth and laid him in a manger, because there was no guest room available for them in the inn. Um, and so we clearly see here um, the fulfillment of this prophecy. We see Joseph goes down to the city of David, like he talked about. This is why Bethlehem was so important. It was the city of David,
Yeah.
and Joseph here was from the house and family line of David. And so he goes to Bethlehem. So now that we are in Bethlehem, we're going to see this prophecy fulfilled. That is where the Messiah would be born. And so he went with Mary, who was pregnant. And while they were there, it says in verse 6, the time came for her to give birth. So she gives birth in Bethlehem,
Mhm.
showing this prophecy fulfilled. For out of you, one will come. So this is the one, Jesus, born of Mary in the city of Bethlehem, the city of David, as we saw was important. Um, this is where he was born. So this is the fulfillment of that prophecy. And I think it's really important to see the promise plus the fulfillment, not
Mhm.
just the promise, but shows us that God is
Yeah.
faithful to carry out all that he says. And that's really what Christmas is all about, is that God has a plan, and how he has said this plan is
Mhm.
going to go is how it's going to go. And we see
Right.
that in each of these promises.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, we see it clearly in our theme with this. I mean, that's why we chose this theme of the promise being fulfilled. And as we get into this in the next couple of weeks before Christmas and ending off December in this 2024 year, we're going to really show how God's promises are fulfilled in the scripture. Um, Next time, we're going to be uh, getting into the gospels and our prime verse in the next few episodes and finishing that off. So thank you all for joining this, and whatever time you're listening to this, morning, afternoon, or evening, and have a good rest of your day.